So there are three different approaches to understand ethnicity. The first is primordialism. Primordialism is ethnic identities are ancient and unchangeable. So this approach, according to this approach, once you accept, so you're born as a Korean, so you will never be changed. So this is the thing. So this is primordialism. So they ask your father, your ancestors, things will never change. According to this approach, so implies ancient hatred drive ethnic conflict. So this is the one of the main cause of ethnic conflict. So why there is ethnic conflict? Because your ancestors hate each other. That's why there is ethnic conflict. This is the primordialism approach. So according to this approach, you can't really explain things because how can you explain like uh, Hindus versus Muslim partition? So Indians, so they were born. I mean, their ethnicity was has to much way goes back to ancient times. But ancient times they didn't hate each other, but certainly they hate each other, right? So this it's really hard to, I mean, maybe you can explain some extent, but it's hard to explain modern times. So this is the limitations of primordialism approach. And instrumentalism, ethnic identities are tools used by leaders for political gain. So this is what I believed. I mean, you don't have to believe what I believed, but it was peaceful. Most of ethnic groups they live there in a peaceful way, but there is political reasons always, and then the elite use this division for their gains. I think it's. I mean, this this one the we understand gender from this perspective. So, for instance, these days, like Koreans, women and men hate each other, right? I think it's because of the politicians. So we are very peaceful. We could live quite well, but certainly we hate each other. I mean, where this actually came from? Is it come from? I mean, if we hate each other like this, so primordialism approach, we can't. I mean, primordialism cannot explain why there is ethnic conflict between Tutsi and Hutu, right? I mean, they hated. They were very peaceful for quite a long time. So ancient hatred doesn't and cannot involve for that incident. But political gain, yes, I think that it can explain a lot of ethnic conflict. So conflict arises from manipulation by selfish leaders. So this is one of the examples of the ethnic conflict. Um, third one is constructivism. So we have studied constructivism, right? So identities are socially constructed and ethnicity are shaped by myth symbol complexes. I don't know which one you find it more persuasive. So ethnicity, there is book, I can't remember, nationalism. In, I can't find I can't remember the book name of the book. So national, it's about national identity. So long time ago we didn't have this kind of strong nationalism. So we have a of course country, and then there was always war, but not as much as strong as nowadays. And then why then we have this nationalism, because we try to remember, and then we try to shape our national identity like this. I think we can find this example quite easily. Like for instance, like we Koreans were colonized by Japan, and then the China was partially colonized by Japan, and Taiwan was colonized by Japan, but Taiwans do not hate Japan as not as much as Koreans, or not as much as Chinese. But Chinese, they were, even though they're partially colonized by Japan, but government actually keep emphasizing what Japan did to Chinese people. And then Koreans, we changed, right? So like during the Moon Jae-in government, we had a huge conflict between between Japan versus Korea. And then this was shaped by the government. So this is constructivism, right? Constructivism idea. And these days, because the government is pro-Japan, and many Korean people actually they do not hate Japan anymore. I mean, even they think that Japanese colonization is blessing. Some people believe like that way. It is because identities were shaped, right, by new ideas, new governments, like that. So constructivism can also explain. So they think the ethnicity doesn't really exist. I mean, I mean, if we look at it like ethnicity, so how can you distinguish Hutu and Tutsi? It's really hard to distinguish. They look all very similar, and but if you look at America, there is different ethnicity, right? So like, but ethnicity itself doesn't really strong in U.S. So U.S. U.S. just they distinguish like Asians or black, white based on the colors, right? But if you that's not really ethnicity, right? So ethnicity means like ancient times. So where your ancestor came from. Are you like Irish, or this is ethnicity, but U.S. people do not really ask about it. So identities were socially constructed, or we can say the U.S. government doesn't want divided ethnic based on the ethnicity. So they emphasize more of American citizens, not like ethnicity. So the people, but some leaders can use it for their political gains. Like for instance, Aung San Suu Kyi. So there was a Rohingya genocide. Some people say genocide, some people are not. But Aung San Suu Kyi, she was highly respected. But during the colonization, the Rohingya ethnicity, they have much more power than the uh, than other ethnic group. And then when they become independent, people started to kill a lot of Rohingya ethnicity. But the Aung San Suu Kyi, she didn't say anything. She neglected the phenomena, and she even take the side of the attacker. And she says, Rohingya ethnicity, they did bad things during the colonization. So I mean, they deserve so. That's what she said. I mean, she didn't really say deserve, but she explained that phenomena like that way. So she used this phenomena, the ethnic conflict, for her political gains, right? Sometimes, like the government actually emphasize certain ethnic groups, or they try to divide, or they try to uh, use this ethnicity for their own reasons. But mostly, if you look at like Bulgaria or if Germany or Turkey, they have, or China, even China, Russia, they have a lot of different kinds of ethnic groups, but they try to mitigate this ethnic conflict because for them, ethnic conflict is not good. So, for instance, like China has um, one China policy. So China is not divided. China doesn't want, the Chinese government doesn't want the China divided into several countries or several. Uh, so China used to composed of different countries, right? So sometimes they have like more than three countries, sometimes three countries, one countries like that. They don't want China divide into like that way again. So that's why they do not emphasize on the ethnic identity. They do not want to use ethnicity as an important political issues, right? And how to identify ethnic conflict. So a conflict is ethnic if the sides are primarily distinguished by ethnicity. Ethnic conflict often involve coalition of ethnic groups choosing sides based on membership. So African civil wars often involve warlords competing over resources, not ethnicity. So there are, I mean, if there are war or conflict, but we cannot say every conflict is ethnic conflict. It is same like we can't say all wars are civil wars, right? Because civil war we need to be qualified as civil wars, it should be within one country. It's like that. So in Africa there are a lot of wars, but not all wars are were ethnic war or ethnic conflict. Some of them are ethnic conflict. And then how what's the most important standard to qualify that conflict as an ethnic conflict? It should be distinguished by ethnicity. Sometimes it can be religious, but it should be with combined with ethnicity. So only there is religion issue, then we can say this is religious war, not ethnic conflict. But usually, ethnic conflict can be combined with religion. Not always, but sometimes. But in that case, we can divide this issue or we can classify it as ethnic conflict. The conflict is ethnic. The conflict should be ethnicity. It should be, I mean, so for instance, like sometimes the war can be, what kind of war was it? Congo. Congo has a war, right? But it wasn't divided. It wasn't about ethnicity. It wasn't competing over resources. But if it was competing over, even though it is competing over resources, but if we divide it into ethnic groups, then we can call this ethnic conflict. So ethnic conflict should be involved a division of two different ethnicity, at least two different ethnicity. If there is no divide into or if standard is not ethnicity, then we cannot say this is ethnic conflict. And then ethnic conflict, we don't say ethnic war, right? Sometimes we can say ethnicity war, but it's because ethnic conflict can be appeared two different categories usually. One is riot, and second one is conflict or civil wars, armed conflict or civil wars. Riots, it's more than like a movement, right? Because there can be violence. So movement is not always combined with or came up with violence, but riots usually combined with uh, armed forces or violence. So usually riots followed with the violence. So riot, and if it's bigger than armed conflict, or if it's bigger than armed conflict, it's civil war or can be wars, right? And characteristics of riot is sudden onset after a minor trigger, rapid escalation to widespread violence, and targeted brutality, rape, torture, and killing. So this is characteristics of riot. Riot is different from movement. So riot is, it's not just eruption. So people just do not demonstrate. They use violence. So at first they can start with minor things. So as I explained, like Syria. I mean, it's not really ethnic groups, ethnicity, but I mean, then we can talk about the Rwanda issues, Hutu and Tutsi. So it was just minor things because the Hutu president was killed, right? And because of that, I mean, it's huge, but not as much as killing that many people, right? So it starts with minor trigger, and then the widespread violence and targeted brutality. It means not they do not just killing, but sometimes there is raped, torture. Because I mean, you should understand this the characteristics. So ethnic conflict usually cause of hatred. So I hate this. So when there is murder, and then if you look at the corpse, then you can tell this is by accident or this is out of hatredism kind of things. So if you look, I mean, during the war, of course, there is brutality like rape, torture, but usually people like during the war they focus on killing, so how many people were killed or in terms of like military during the between the military forces, but they do not torture much. But as in conflict you can see a lot of torture because people hate each other, so they want to make people they wanted to torture. So this is kind of unique issues. Of course, every war or every conflict you can find torture, but not as much as more. I mean, the ethnic conflict torture is more frequent because of this haterism. So people like really hate, so they want to make people suffer from torturing. Not, I mean, killing itself doesn't satisfy them. So that's why torture is always there. And ethnic, if you look at the ethnic conflict, then there is a long-standing hostility. So pre-existing tensions between groups. But it's not always true. But if you look at Hutu and Tutsi, yeah, it occurred quite a long time. I mean, when did it happen? So in 1994, but they were colonized quite a long time ago. So the pre-existing tensions exist from the colonization. So long-standing hostility and authoritative social support, leaders justify violence. Security forces permit or ignore the violence. So I gave example of Rohingya conflict, right? So Rohingya ethnic, this is ethnic conflict too. So Rohingya is ethnic conflict too. And then leaders justify violence. So I told you that the Aung San Suu Kyi, she justified violence, right? And security force permit or ignore the violence. So that's what Aung San Suu Kyi did. So she didn't get involved. And triggering event, a perceived threat or attack, a political change provoking fear or anger. So this means there were tensions. So Hutu and Tutsi were like that. So there was colonization, and after the colonization, that's political change, right? So they became independent. Things change, and this political change provoking fear or anger. So this is the trigger event. There is always trigger event. I wanted to give an example of Sri Lanka.